Longshot, written by Werner Ving. They called her Ayers. She will be the longest-lived person of all life on Earth, and probably the last to go extinct. Since the day she was born, she has been a member of Earth life, and she has her own consciousness to ask questions. And in those long, dark years before she was buried in the fire, she found that she was also able to forget. Ayers' initial memory was only fragmentary, less than 15 seconds in total. Perhaps someone inadvertently brought her to consciousness. She was sitting at the top of the control room. In the midnight, launch of the rocket was imminent. Under the light of 10 searchlights, the tall standing thruster emitted a silver-white light, and from time to time, you could also see the spark of light reflected from the automatic rifle body. This is the end of a short memory clip. During the launch, Ayers lost consciousness again. But that scene just now has always remained in her deepest memory, clearly visible, yet mysterious and unpredictable. Initially, for more than a year, she orbited in low Earth orbit, and her eyes had adapted to the 150-centimeter focal length reflector telescope, so she can distinguish stars that are less than 1/10 of a second apart. She is not idle. Her designers have designated this phase as a testing period. A manned space station is always at her side, constantly sending her operating instructions and practice subject via radio signals. Most of the subjects are in the field of ballistics, curved approach orbits, elliptical transfer orbits, and so on. Ayers usually needs to use its own equipped telescope and spectrometer to determine the parameters of the subject. For example, to determine the orbits of Venus and Mercury, and to calculate the minimum energy required to pass by these two planets. Then, for example, determining the orbit of Mars, analyzing its atmosphere, and developing a control scheme for entry along a hyperbolic orbit. Many observational problems are related to the Earth, the determination of atmospheric pressure and its composition, or the Doppler analysis of vegetation. Usually she was set to solve organic analysis subjects within 30 seconds. And at the last stage of practice, even during the solution process, the rules change frequently, which often causes errors in her directed jet streams. Even her thinking and sensory centers could not keep up. One of the first things Ayers knew was that in addition to the memory, she had an archival storage, which records operational processes and factual matters, just like a library. As with most other libraries, this archive storage is not as easy to use as Ayers' memory. However, the information it contains is much more comprehensive and precise. All problems are instantly solved as soon as the solution is extracted from the library. For Ayers, the real challenge was to pick the right solution program based on incomplete information and amend the program so that such program can respond to unexpected situations such as energy shortages or equipment failures. Although Ayers performed extremely poorly at first, she eventually broke through the limitations of her design. This is also the end of the training process. Since then, Ayers has been running completely on her own equipment. The first time she's faced anything on her own since she was born, but not the last. Although she does not know what the ultimate purpose of her existence is, she is still eager to learn as much as possible about the home planet. For most of the time that she flew over the daytime hemisphere, she kept looking down, trying her best to find some pattern from the blend of blue, green, and white in her sight. More and more transport vehicles came to her, and gradually the short, thick, white pillars were connected into a spiderweb-like frame. She learned from the archive storage that they weighed 20,000 tons, heavier than some of the ocean liners. Soon after, the designer connected Ayers' consciousness to the control system of the massive structure behind her. It was like she was given a whole new body. From then on, she was not only able to feel and observe, she could also use any of the hundreds of propulsion receptacles in any one of the 15 fusion reactors at will. And these are one of the components of that mega structure. She found that she had enough energy to put into practice some of the ideas she had during her training. The crucial moment has finally arrived. The manned satellite sends the route instructions through the microwave exciter. Based on these instructions, she calculated the possible orbits. All of these conclusions are accurate. Launch signals were finally sent by the satellite. The most powerful jet stream formed instantly. Ayers' expedition began. She accelerated gradually with a constant G-force. Now she was leaving her creators at the speed above 20 kilometers a second. Thus, a journey lasting for half a year set off. Ayers waved goodbye to the depleted thrusters, drifting alone in the endless space of the universe. She stared into the darkness through her gate reflector telescope. The South Gate system appeared 4 light-years away in the view. That's where she was about to go. Ayers can clearly see 2 stars, one of which is slightly faint and reddish in color. She's meticulously measured their location as well as her own and led to the conclusion that her present orbit is indeed so ideal that no mid-course adjustments will be required for thousands of years. In the months since, the Earth side has been in contact with Ayers through the microwave exciter, asking questions that need to be answered and inquiring about her health. If there is any failure on her body parts now or in the next few hundred years, the Earth can provide very little help. After less than 2 years, the sun had become a very bright star far behind her. The only trouble is that it now takes a full 16 hours to ask and answer a question with the Earth side. Shortly afterwards, something surprising suddenly happened. For more than 3 weeks, the sun's brightness continued to increase, eventually reaching 10 times its previous level. This change is not really a big deal, but an astronomical phenomenon called nova by Earth astronomers. Nevertheless, Ayers was still confused by the event, and for several months analyzed it in her own way of thinking. Because after that, her microwave contact with Earth was completely cut down and never restored. Now Ayers must embrace the long, empty future. In interstellar space, there are rarely any major events. The biggest threat is the constant decay of her own energy. Although she has to deal with complicated monitoring tasks, and although her intelligence is not as good as it used to be, but Ayers still found time to gaze quietly into the vastness of space, and it discovered numerous binary star systems. Notice that the 2 stars in the system orbit each other with a faint glow as time goes by. In her eyes, the universe seemed to move and even seemed to have life. The neighboring planets are only off by 1 degree per century, while the huge galaxy of Andromeda moves for a tiny second only in the last 1,000 years. From time to time, she also looks back at the solar system. Even after 1,000 years, she can still recognize Jupiter and Saturn. These are the top 2 planets in our solar system in terms of size. It was easier to see. On the way, Ayers ignited a small booster rocket to adjust its course, only to find that it could only achieve at most 3/4 of the standard thrust. She had to make 2 ignitions before she was satisfied to embark on a new voyage. For the next 50 years, Ayers searched for the source of the malfunction, without realizing that it had been done to her over hundreds of years. Fortunately, as long as the problem is not further complicated, it is possible for her to complete her expedition to all planets in the South Gate double-star system. But before she could finish her research on the propulsion problem, another major failure was in front of her. This has the potential to be one of the worst failures. After centuries of time, the magnetic field within the program storage system has been gradually disappearing. The least used programs are missing first. She couldn't remember what her mission was for the trip. The fractured program only prompted her to conduct a deeper survey and enter a planet. Ayers guessed that after she had successfully landed on a suitable planet, she must have had more important tasks to accomplish. In order to find clues to figure out the ultimate purpose of the trip, she also studied her own structure in detail. As a result, she found an unidentified area inside her body that contained an even distribution of frozen liquid. The temperature needs to be kept near absolute zero for long periods of time. Various impurities are also mixed in this area. This conclusion intrigued Ayers, but no matter how much she compared it to her own memory, she could not see what the significance was. Ayers continued to march forward. In the blink of an eye, several centuries have passed, and her destination, the twin stars of the South Gate that cling to each other, appear much brighter than ever. She pointed the telescope at the brighter of the 2 stars and gave it the name Abel, and the smaller one is named Baker. With patience, Ayers adjusted the angle of her telescope and spent the next 5 years observing Baker. Then, once again, it turned back to Abel. Eventually, Ayers was sure that she had found a planet orbiting around Baker. Perhaps there is also a planet orbiting Abel, both of which are most likely massive gas planets. But that's okay. She knew that under the cover of the light of Abel and Baker, there must still exist unknown smaller planets. In less than 900 years, she will be wandering in the constellation of Centaurus. Ayers still tirelessly continued to observe. At last, she could see the tiny point of light of the huge gas planet. With just 300 years remaining, through more accurate surveys than ever before, eventually she discovered several more planets, and that Abel has a total of 3, while Baker has 4. However, she only targeted 2 candidates, and named them as Abel 2 and Baker 2. They are both at a moderate distance from the star. With less than a year to go, Ayers saw the moon of Abel 2, and now she could accurately calculate the mass of the planet and further determine her course. At this point, there are less than 50 and 80 astronomical units away from Abel and Baker respectively. She can effortlessly do spectral analysis for the planets. The atmospheres of both major targets contain sufficient oxygen, however, the water vapor composition of the further one, that is, Baker 2, does not seem to meet the standard. In addition, the atmosphere of Abel 2 contains a variety of carbon-containing compounds. Moreover, its color is a promising lime green. According to Ayers' already partially damaged memory, these are very desirable features. With less than 10 days left, Ayers is 10 million kilometers ahead of the orbit of Abel's gas planet, and her target planet is along the near-circular orbit revolving around Abel. And at a distance of 27 astronomical units from Abel, Baker is radiating light. But Ayers was more concerned about her target planet, Abel 2. 1 hour from the target, Ayers arrives at the orbit of the Abel 2 outer satellites. The most critical task now was to biochemically assess it, or at least what remained of the program telling her to do so. 5 minutes to target. The blurred outline of the planet Abel 2 filled her vision. Within 10 seconds, she had to decide whether to land or not. The success or failure of the mission that has lasted 10,000 years is at stake, because she knows very well that once she chooses to land, she will never be able to take off into the sky again. If she decides to bypass Abel 2, she must use up most of her remaining propellant immediately in order to pick up speed and break out of Abel's planetary system as quickly as possible. 13 months later, it will arrive near the planet Baker. At that time, the booster rocket may still be able to provide enough power to help her enter the atmosphere of planet Baker 2. However, if the planet's environment is not satisfactory, she cannot turn back and has to choose to land. Otherwise, she will end up floating in the darkness of interstellar space forever. Ayers quickly weighed the pros and cons in 3 seconds and eventually concluded that Abel 2 was a better match for the criteria she could recall. The color of Baker 2 was too dry. So she threw away the small booster rocket that had caused her so much trouble. At the same time, she also painfully abandoned the reflecting telescope that had helped her a lot and paid lots of attention to. At this point, she was all alone. Finally, in order to do a final look back when she was still in orbit, Ayers maneuvered a 90-degree rotation of the ship. The loss of the telescope made what she could see very limited, but she still recognized the blurred point of light in her vision. It was the sun. She couldn't help but wish in her heart that she could remember the already forgotten program again. Ayers closed her eyes and waited quietly. 5 seconds later, her speed rapidly spiked. The huge fireball surrounding the periphery of the ship illuminates the ocean tens of thousands of meters below like daylight. 10,000 meters remain. Ayers will open the wing parachute. The tough polymer parachute became stretched out above the ship, like a gentle flower slowly falling to the ground. The long journey that took 10,000 years and spanned 4 light years has finally come to an end. Ayers listened without moving a muscle. To her, the sound was so incredible. Nearby, the stream bubbled and sang. In the distance, there's faintly audible chattering of creatures. Ayers was aware that this voyage was completely over and could never continue. But it doesn't matter. That was certainly the plan in the first place. What really matters is that she knows her mission is not yet complete and that her final destination remains a mystery. If the mystery cannot be revealed, the designer's 10,000-year gamble will come to nothing. This possibility was the only one that was disturbing Ayers, because that was, after all, the ultimate purpose for creating her. Once again, she examined the program memory left after a long and dangerous landing, but found nothing new. Then, she studied her own body, and she took a thorough, even destructive approach to the test, but no unexpected results emerged from the test either. Finally, the question focuses again on the frozen ice cube that is always with her. Ayers turned off all the cryostats and waited for the internal temperature to slowly climb. She discovered that the designer had left a backup in ensuring the successful completion of this mission. Additional memory units were planted in the frozen device. As this backup slowly activated, Ayers dimly sensed that this memory unit was completely different from the previous one. The method it uses is optical storage rather than magnetic storage. Ayers now understands what she has to do next. She raised the temperature of the frozen water, which filled the cylindrical cabin, to 37 degrees Celsius and extracted a tiny cell from the adjacent storage room. She injected it into the melted amniotic fluid, and a few minutes later, blood was injected to analyze the series of actions she just made, and finally understood the purpose of this trip. And in the next 9 months, she will know more.